Okay, so I finally finished the Dragon Herald, and I get to do what I've been looking forward to doing for a while, which is tiering the characters. So, there's 31 characters in total, and they're all pixelated right now because some of them are secret with secret recruitment conditions, so I figured I'd hide them until I can, warn you, the viewer, that there are going to be spoilers for the hack in this game, and, well, specifically spoilers for recruiting the characters. I'm not going to talk about any story spoilers or anything like that. Although some story spoilers might become self-evident if you see who's recruitable, which is why they're all hidden right now. Anyway, I'm going to unhide them soon, but if you want to avoid spoilers for recruitment and you want to play this hack completely blind, then that might be something. This might be a good time to just watch something else or do something else. If you're not concerned about spoilers, or if you've played the hack before, or whatever else might be the case, feel free to keep watching. I'm going to unhide the characters now. So there they are. Okay, so I'm going to go into methodology for a bit. When tiering characters, it's important to judge them all by the same ruler. You don't want to say, oh, well, 4 is great because he's really good with offensive stats, like he has high strength or whatever, and then say that like Alto is bad because she has high strength. That makes no sense, right? They're different characters, but you're using the same criteria to judge them both differently. That makes no sense. And then using different criteria to judge 2 units also makes no sense. So last time I made a tier list was for the 4 kings, and that ROM hack is way different from a game like the Dragon Herald, which the Dragon Herald is more similar to an actual Fire Emblem game, like a mainline Fire Emblem game, whereas the 4 kings is very focused on specific character roles, which is why I tiered them mostly by their role. The Dragon Herald is more about what characters to use based on their stats and growths and classes. So much similar to a GBA Fire Emblem experience, or most other games in Fire Emblem, honestly. So like S tier would basically be, this unit is so good that requires 0 investment for them to do their best, and their best is really great and super useful, and they don't need any like extra characters to help them with like protection or healing or supports. A good example of a character in S rank would be Lorelei. She's a dancer that you get in 7X. Lorelei is good because she's a dancer. Being able to refresh your units is incredibly useful in every Fire Emblem game. She has the ability to use swords and starts with a Shamshir, which she can use. There's no point in having her fight on player phase, and there's no point in leaving her exposed on enemy phase. The main reason why she can fight is as an absolute last resort. You definitely don't want to rely on that. You want her to be dancing for your best units or for units that you need in specific circumstances. So let's say you're being rushed by a bunch of flying units, and you have Rona nearby, but she can only attack once. She can shoot someone with a bow exactly once. So you have Lorelei dance for her, and boom, she's doing it again. She might not be your best unit ever, but certainly very useful in that circumstance. So one of the most flexible units in the game, or in any Fire Emblem game really, is the dancer, and that's why she's there. On the opposite end of the scale, you have D, which is basically, no matter how much investment you put into this person, they're never going to be your best unit, and there are going to be other units that you can put in their deployment slot, and you don't have to give them experience or special equipment or whatever because it's just wasted on them. A good example of a character that fits into that tier would be Cassie. Cassie is her class is called Blighted, and it's sort of like a magic trainee you get after chapter 14 is over. I think the only condition is that Myron has to be alive, but there is a recruitment guide. If you're not sure, you can check on that. Now, Cassie as a concept is a really cool character because she gets special weapons that nobody else gets. No other playable units get, at least. And being able to promote after that into mage and then branch out into I think either Sage or Valkyrie is pretty cool. But at the same time, you're basically stuck training a trainee in the last 6 or so chapters of the game, where her hit rate with her weapons is going to be like in the 60-ish range. She's going to be doubled by even the slowest of enemies, and basically needs to be trained on enemies that can't counter her. So basically snipers and healers, which you want to take out quickly for different reasons. Bows have 2-3 range in this hack, something I'll get into later when I'm judging a lot of these units. And you want to take them out quickly so they don't bother your units too much. And it's harder to surround units that can attack at 2-3 range because not only do you have to surround the sniper, you have to stay out of their area of attack, which can be tricky. It's a pain in the butt that's not extremely useful, considering that there are better units than Cassie out there. And if you train her up, more power to you. She's a fun unit to use, I'm sure. I plan to use her in a second playthrough. She's just not an efficient unit. Alright, so between S and D would be characters that are closer to S, characters that are closer to D, and characters that are kind of in the middle. And my suspicion is that I'm going to tier a lot of units in the middle here. Which probably makes the most sense, honestly. So we'll continue now, going roughly in recruitment order. So Yo is the main protagonist of the game. She's her class is Herald, which is kind of like an Ethlin Troubadour kind of thing, where she's able to use staves as well as swords. However, in terms of combat utility, she's not great. She's very fragile from the start and never gets much bulkier. Her promotion is interesting because it gives her a 1-2 range sword that is exclusive only to her, called the Fire Emblem. And that promotion happens roughly in the middle of the game, so if you use her extensively to heal, and not much else, she'll probably be like level 9 or 10 at least. By the time she's going into her promotion chapter, and then she'll definitely get a few levels then, because she'll basically be forced to fight at least a little bit during that chapter. But basically, she mostly just needs to be babysat a lot. She needs either people protecting her, people nearby. She needs to be out of range of enemies. Or she needs someone to be healing her every turn if you're really going to get her into combat a lot. So I'd put her here because the healing utility in particular is really good. Since you get her right from the prologue with a heal staff, it's hard to ignore the implications of that. It means you can save on vulneraries and stuff. And in a game like the Dragon Herald where your resources are stretched to them, being able to save on resources is really good. So that's why she's there. Next, I'm going to talk about Taiga. Taiga is essentially the Jagan in this hack. He's a hero. His bases are the best for the early game. He drops off rather quickly, though. His growths are okay, but considering that he's a pre-promote, he's not going to get a lot of experience for kills. He starts with an A rank in axes and a B in swords. if you can S-rank axes, that's probably ideal for him, since 1-2 range axes are much more common than 1-2 range swords in this game. Taiga probably belongs here. Or maybe here. It's kind of debatable, honestly. Like, Taiga is probably like closer to here in the early game and then slowly falls off. So probably around like here, so maybe overall he's like here-ish. Well, that can't really be understated how much he just helps through the early game. The early game would be impossible without him, so I think I'm going to keep him in A. Although he might drift down this line as better units appear in front of him, but we'll see. Next, I want to talk about Bird. You get her as a level 9 knight, and what's great about Bird is that she is really tanky. Really, really tanky. She has high defense, specifically. Barely any resistance at all, but high defense. Her bases are high, her growths are high in defense. She barely gets any speed. It's like 20% speed growth, and her base speed is extremely low, too. So over time, she's going to get doubled more and more. Now, the path of Bird is, in the early game, she's going to get doubled mostly by physical attackers, because most of the enemies you face in the early game are physical attackers. In the mid-game, you start to see more mages and more physical attacking classes with magic weapons, so like Light Brand, for example. And she can't handle those. She can't take one attack from them. She can barely take one attack from them. When she's getting doubled, she's going to near death from attacks, and it just becomes harder and harder and harder to keep her alive. But in the early game, her tankiness is really hard to understate as how useful it is. And that said, it doesn't... Like, Taiga helps out in the early game, but is still really useful in the mid-game and late game, whereas Bird is useful in the early game, but not super useful in the mid-game. And then really more of a burden in the late game. So I think she belongs here. Or maybe even here. Hard to say. I'd put her here, though, I think. Next, I want to talk about Lawrence, who you also get in the prologue. Lawrence is over here, and he starts off as a soldier. I forgot what level he starts off as, but basically he's locked to lances, and he's footlocked. A common phenomenon with a lot of footlocked units, not all of them, but most, is that they have really high offensive growths and really high offensive bases, so really high strength, or power in this case, really high speed, reasonably high skill, and then lower defense, resistance, and luck. That's not always true for every character that's footlocked, but for Lawrence, it's more true than most others. Lawrence is probably one of those units that turns out really good if you train him a lot from the very beginning. Of all the characters you get early on, he's probably the most growth of the growth units. But Lawrence is in a class where, which is not, it's not the most useful class, and the promotions are a little bit underwhelming too. Captain, I should probably circle back to Bird promotions, but for now I'm going to talk about Lawrence's promotions. Captain and Halberdier. Halberdier is lance-locked, and they get the Pierce skill, and captains get access to swords as well as lances. Halberdier is probably the better of the two promotions, since swords are pretty underwhelming. But basically, where Lawrence shines the most is dedicated use. So the more you use him, the better he gets. But it's hard to use him in the early game where he's really bad. That said, I think Lawrence probably belongs here because he's one of those units that just you need to trust that it'll get good, and a few bad level ups will really throw him off. But a few good level ups will make him really good. So, yeah, there he is, basically. And circling back to Bird's promotions, Great Knight is a 7 move unit that can use axes, swords, and lances. And Vanguard, which is a promotion that replaces the general class, can use swords, axes, lances, and bows. Now, the nice thing about you being able to use bows in this game is that the iron bow, steel bow, and silver bow are all 2-3 range, which can be a blessing and a curse because it affects the enemy too, but and the Dragon Herald's already very player phase oriented because a lot of characters tend to have lower defenses and higher offense, and so do the enemy. So being able to shoot an enemy from 3 range, especially like a powerful mage or something, is really useful because you're able to chip and then you can close in for the kill if you want. So I think I promoted her to Great Knight in my first playthrough. I wish I promoted her to Vanguard just for that bow chip. And the fact that Bird constantly gets doubled, if you're going to make use of her at all, it's probably best for you to rely on her for a mix of chip damage and tanking attacks. Okay, so next we're going to talk about Fours. Fours is a Corsair, which is a renamed pirate that you get in Chapter 1. Fours is kind of disappointing, which is kind of common for early game axe fighters. First of all, the fact that you already have someone like Taiga who can use his axes better than Fours can himself means it's very advantageous to just have Fours trade over his weapons to Taiga for a bit. Especially, I think he starts with a hand axe. You definitely want to give that to Taiga. Fours can barely hit, which is the problem. He's relatively low skill, relatively low bulk in terms of defense, and he has pretty high resistance compared to other units in this game that attack with physical power. But Fours is kind of silly. I think the best thing about Fours is that both of his promotions give him some form of utility, and each form of utility is pretty different. So first thing is Warrior, which we already talked about. Bow chip. You're basically giving Fours the ability to bow chip, which probably pretty unreliable for him because of his low skill. The other option, of course, is Berserker, which lets him go into mountains and quickly cross rivers, which being able to go into mountains is pretty handy in a couple chapters. Crossing rivers, it's fine. Fours belongs probably here. Good early game units when you don't have anyone else to really use. After that, he starts to pale in comparison to your other options. Next, we'll talk about Chris. Chris is a disciple, which is a monk that can use light magic you get in Chapter 2. And Chris's greatest strength probably is that her base stats are very evenly balanced. So she's arguably one of the best units you have in the early game besides Taiga, just for sheer offensive power, as well as some defensive power. And the chapter you get her in, Chapter 2, has a lot of enemies with magical weapons, and her resistance is probably going to be the highest on the team. So being able to tank those magical attacks is really handy. Being able to tank magical attacks in this hack in general is really handy. And light magic is overall pretty good in this game too. Her promotions are Disciple and Bishop. Disciple, no, not Disciple. Her base class is Disciple. Renegade is her promotion class. Bishop doesn't give access to new forms of magic, but does give her crit plus. So she'll be able to crit more often with her light magic. Her other option, being Renegade, gives her access to dark magic, which could be pretty good for her because of her bulkiness. She'd benefit from being able to just Nosferatu tank. The main issue with that is that Nosferatu is expensive and only has 20 uses. So in a very limited circumstance, she has a good utility there. Whereas with Bishop, her utility is a bit more generalized. And both promotion classes get access to saves, so if you just want her to heal people, you can't go wrong with either one. But personally, I went Bishop, but I can see the merit to both of the promotion paths. Crisco's here. It barely takes any effort to make her good, and she stays good throughout the entire game. So, there she is. Next, we should probably go back to Rona, which we get in Chapter 1. Rona is an archer. Really high power, really high skill growth, reasonably high speed growth, and the ability to promote into either Assassin, which does not give lethality in this game, but does give access to swords, and Sniper, which does not unlock new items or new weapons, but does give access to the Ballistician skill. Archers in this game cannot use Ballista. Only snipers can. And I think pretty much every outdoor map has a Ballista that can be used. So that's an option if you want to use her to do that. I did not know that there would be Ballista in pretty much every chapter, or every outdoor chapter at least, so I promoted her to Assassin thinking, I don't know when I'll run into a Ballista. Well, I ran into Ballistas a bunch, so I personally recommend that you promote her to a Sniper. Being able to chip at 2-3 range reliably and often double is a very underrated ability in this hack, I think. It's just so good to be able to do that, and it's very handy pretty much all the time. From the beginning of the game to the end, there's always a reason to use a bow. So, Rona, I'm going to put an S tier. Of course, the more you use her, the better she gets, but since you're going to be using her so much anyway to weaken enemies from a distance, she's going to be good before you know it. You don't even need to try to cap her. She will cap her level. Moving on. Characters you get in Chapter 3 include Ludo, a mercenary. He's relatively easy to recruit, and as far as usefulness goes, he's kind of average. Kind of like what I said with Lawrence, how footlocked units have higher offensive stats and lower defensive. It applies to Ludo too. His promotion paths are Hero or Ranger, which Ranger is probably ideal because of the bows again, but Hero's okay too, I guess. It's kind of an underwhelming class when all you really get is 1-2 range hand axe stuff, which is useful, but not as useful as like bows in a player phase oriented hack. I'm gonna put Ludo probably here, just because theoretically Getting him to Ranger is probably going to be your best bet. But it does take him a while to get there. And he's stuck with swords until he does get there. But, you know, that's not awful in this hack. I didn't use him that much in my Let's Play, but theoretically speaking, I think he probably belongs here. Also in Chapter 3, you get Hartman. Hartman is over here. Hartman is a Cavalier. Not bad of one either. His base stats are pretty balanced. And his growth rates are also pretty balanced, tending to favor bulk, I think. He's just a really solid Cavalier, and it's the first one you get. Being able to move seven tiles and not be fragile like Yo, it's pretty neat. Being able to use javelins is pretty neat. In fact, I think he's best off S-ranking his lances, because one of the first S-rank weapons you get is a lance. And Hartman's a good enough unit to probably unlock that pretty quickly, as long as you just dedicate him to using lances a lot. Although Lawrence, if you S-rank his lances, that'd probably be good for him too, but if you promote him to Halberdier, you basically have no choice if you're going to keep using him. But I think Lawrence belongs somewhere around here. In terms of sheer usefulness, maybe even here. Because overall, his ability to tank attack stays relevant throughout the entire hack. Compared to someone like Bird, where her lack of resistance is going to fail her eventually. Hartman gets a reasonable amount of resistance and speed, and doesn't have to worry too much about taking attacks too much. In Chapter 4, you get Filch. Filch is an interesting case because what you choose to do with Filch determines a lot, in my opinion. She starts at level 4 with, I think, 12 speed, which is enough to steal some of the stealable items in this hack, but only some. You have to train her and get her level up so that she gains speed, which I think she has a 60-something% chance. I think it's 60 even. It might be 65. But you have to get her a few speed level ups. Of course, you could promote her, and her options are Trickster and Rogue. Trickster gives her access to staves, and Rogue gives her the Canto skill, which is pretty neat. Rogue would get +2 speed on promotion. I think 17 speed or 18 speed is the threshold to be able to steal everything in this hack. So it's a question of, do you want to steal everything? Or do you want to not steal everything and miss out? And if you do want to steal everything, do you want to deploy Filch and train her so that she gains levels and might gain the speed level up? I don't know that training her is worth the items that she can only steal by training for them. It can be under certain circumstances, but it's a very hard to justify choice. I will say that she's useful in keeping alive to 7x, at least, because deploying her in 7x grants eventual access to the secret shop, or rather member card, which then she can if you deploy her in a map, she'll say, oh, there's a secret shop around here, and you'll be able to visit it with the member card. So that's cool. Still, though, I think Filch belongs... I'm going to say that she belongs here and that Lawrence belongs in front of 4s here. And circling back to Hartman in his promotions, it's Great Knight and Paladin. Promote him to Paladin. End of story. Great Knight is not really a good promotion for a Cavalier. It never was. I guess it could be interesting for Hartman just to make him a bit more bulky, but Paladin is fine for him. Who do you get in Chapter 5? You get Goro in Chapter 5. Or is it Goro? No, it's Goro. I'm getting characters confused because I'm playing Tearing Saga too. Okay, so Goro is a fighter. And he's basically like other Footlocked units. High offense, low defense. Really disappointing if you promote him early. And his options are hero and warrior. So for bow chip, make him a warrior. For the ability to use swords, make him a hero, I guess. If you really want to use him, I would promote him to warrior for the chip. Being able to use swords in this game is not that great unless you're Yo or Breanor, but more on him later. Goro probably belongs here. Yeah, I think that's probably about right. Maybe here. Let's leave him here for now. Next on the list is you missed Samantha. You get her at the end of Chapter 3. She's a cleric. She has really high power, so she's going to be able to use heal staves about as well as Yo can use a mend staff by the time you get her. She's really good at using staves, and she's really good at using staves. That's really all there is to her. Her promotions are kind of lackluster. You can either promote her to Spellblade, which gives her swords, anima, and of course continue to use staves. Or you can make her a Crusader, which unlocks the use of axes alongside staves. Samantha's defense is really low. So what you make her is kind of tricky. Because if you make her a Spellblade, most of the things she'll be attacking are probably going to be other mages because of the high res that she has. But she can't do that very well with anima magic. She'll have to close in with a sword. Whereas with Crusader, her res is still going to be high, her defense is still going to be low, but she can use hand axes instead, which is arguably a bit better. I would promote Samantha into a Crusader if you use her, and just like I did in my Let's Play. And you really should use her, she's pretty good. I'd stick her here. No, here is fine, I think. Being able to use staves really well right off the bat is nice. Who is next here? Mert, we got in Chapter 5. I'm jumping around here now, but whatever. Mert is a merchant. He's got a wagon. He's able to use bows. He does not promote, as far as I know. And he belongs right here. You can send stuff to the supply without deploying Mert. And there are very rare circumstances I can think of where you'd want to pull something out of supply mid-battle. Normally you get enough deployed units where everyone can pretty much hold what they need, and if you need someone else to hold stuff for other people, you could still manage that, I guess. Good people to hold things for would be Yo and Lorelei. They can just... like, Lorelei can hold stuff for somebody and then dance for them, and like trade and then dance, and overall it's there are options besides Mert. His ability to use bows, though, is not bad. In Chapter 7 especially, where there's some Pegasus Knights at the beginning of the map. Mert can help out there, and you don't really have anyone else to deploy anyway, so you may as well deploy Mert and put him to good use. Also, he gives you the silver card in 7X if you deploy him. Not that that really factors into his rating or anything, but It's worth noting, I guess. We should talk about Shozo. Shozo is a summoner that you get with really high bases, pretty high growths, and although he can't summon phantoms, which are arguably... Phantom is probably like one of the most useful classes in FE8. You can't summon those. You can summon Bone Walkers, though. And interesting thing about Bone Walkers is that sometimes they spawn with Lance Reavers. And also sometimes they spawn with Killing Edges, but... also, the Bone Walkers are, like, really dodgy. Like, they have relatively high avoid, and putting them in a forest is usually pretty easy to do on most maps that are outdoors. So a Bone Walker can last through an enemy phase pretty nicely. And if they don't, that's fine too. The point of a Bone Walker basically is to either block a path for one turn or bait someone over for one turn. And the Bone Walker does really well at that. But Shozo himself is really good. A really good dark magic user. He's probably the best user of any Nosferatu tomes you get. He starts with a tome called Naglfar, which, of course, you can trade to other... I think that's his personal tome, actually. It's effective against light magic, which rarely comes into play all that often, but it's good against light brand users more than anything. He's just a really bulky dude, and it's really hard to get him killed. And he's going to go right over here, where he belongs. On S tier. Yep. Who else do we have? Mute. Get her around the same time as Shozo. She's a relatively high-level Myrmidon with high res, relatively high speed, kind of lower stats everywhere else. As a Myrmidon, she can also promote into Ranger or Swordmaster. And Swordmaster gives extra crit, Ranger gives access to bows. I promoted her into a Swordmaster in my playthrough. Big mistake. I wish I made her into a Ranger. I didn't at first because Rangers lose access to the Shamshir, and I was using the Shamshir a lot with Mute. But that was a big mistake. She's not very good at attacking at one range in this hack because she's pretty much outclassed offensively by most enemies, and you don't want to really waste time sending a Swordmaster to attack someone one-on-one if they can't kill. And the whole gimmick of a Swordmaster is that you might get a crit with them. Unfortunately, Mute isn't reliable enough to dodge attacks, and isn't reliable enough to take attacks very well, unless she's attacking a mage. So your next best option really ends up being make her a Ranger, and just have her attack mages from a distance with bows, and if she takes a hit, it won't do a lot of damage. She's also would be better using bows at attacking magic weapon holders, like a hero with a light brand, because she won't have to deal with weapon triangle stuff, because she can just use a bow instead. I'm gonna put Mute probably here. I think that's a good spot for her. Who is next on this list? Horus, Chapter 8, Wyvern Rider. Interesting character. Kind of has... I think his main weakness is probably his really low res, otherwise his stats are pretty good overall. I would say the Wyvern promotion path is one of the more interesting promotion paths in this hack, because you get to choose between Wyvern Lord, which takes away weakness to bows, but adds armor effectiveness weakness. So, like, bows are no longer doing 3 times damage to him, but armor slayers are. And his movement stays the same, so it stays at 7. But not taking effective bow damage is really useful for like rescue drop shenanigans and the like. And it can also just be useful to send Horus off on his own to deal with a faraway archer or a ballista user or something. Now Wyvern Knight grants a total of 9 move and doesn't have Pierce, but that 9 move is pretty useful. So both promotions are pretty useful. I'd say that Wyvern Knight is probably better in the short term, whereas Wyvern Lord becomes more clearly good in the long term. Although if you do rely a lot on rescue dropping, you probably want to go with Wyvern Knight anyway, just because that 9 move really comes in handy in certain chapters where rescue dropping units is a good strategy. I'm going to put Horus. I hesitate to put him in S, but I feel like he deserves A. Probably here is good for him. Next, we can tier Laguna, I suppose. Actually, let's tier Myron. We get him earlier. Myron is a shaman who starts pretty close to promoting, if I remember correctly. I think it's like level 8 or 9. Myron's gimmick, such as it is, it's not much of one, but it's that he has 0 resistance, and he never gets a point in resistance, ever. Ever. His growth is 0, his promotions don't give him resistance at all. He's stuck at 0, I guess, unless you give him a talisman. Although I'm not sure there are any in this game. Actually, I think there's 1, at least. But Myron's really good despite that. Most units are attacking defense, or most enemy units are attacking on defense. So having Myron have really high defense is good. Alongside Shozo, he's probably one of the better Nosferatu users because of that high defense. On his own, he's just really good because you can pretty much send him off by himself, and he'll double pretty much any unit except some of the faster ones with Flux. And the only unfortunate thing about him is that he can't promote to Summoner. His options are either Druid or Dark Rider. Druid gives access to Anima and Staves, and Dark Rider just gives access to Anima, but it gives an extra movement. I would say Myron is probably better in Dark Rider for the extra movement because he's easy to send off on his own a lot. But Druid could be fine for him too if you want an extra staff user. Although he's kind of wasted on the back lines for the reasons I mentioned. I think Myron actually belongs here. It's one of the best units in the game. Doesn't take a whole lot to get him good, and he stays pretty reliable for a long time. And it's easy to barrier him or give him a pure water if you really need him to be exposed to a mage, which you usually don't. Next, let's cover Elise, I think. She's a Pegasus Knight that starts at level 18. It's a pretty good idea to just promote her right off the bat. Your options are Falco Knight, which gives access to staves, or Shade Knight, which gives access to swords. I think Shade Knight has slightly better offensive promotion bonuses, whereas Falco Knight is a little better defensively. Now, if you train Filch a lot, eventually you'll be able to steal a Filey Shield, which, if you promote Horus to Wyvern Lord, you may as well give to Elise. And then you have 2 units that are not going to take 3 times damage from bows, which could come in handy. If you don't want to do that. Well, I don't know what you'd do with her, to be honest. She's good. It's just the density of enemies with bows gets a lot higher towards the end game. But until then, she's still a good unit, which I would happily place probably here. She's not bad. In my playthrough, I promoted her to Shade Knight. I think Falco Knight is the better one for her. Being able to use staves is it's pretty neat. While flying especially. Just because there's so much utility for that. If you pick up a unit and then fly them off and then drop them somewhere and you stay around nearby them, you can heal them up and just like attend to them personally while your rest of your army goes a different direction. And then you can pick up the person that you were healing before and then fly back to your army. Overall, it's pretty high utility. Really specific utility though, so as good as it sounds, I don't think she belongs at A, but I think high B is good for her. Next, let's discuss Laguna. Laguna is the ultimate growth unit. She's a level 1 Archsage, and she has really low bases, but most of her growths are over 100%. And the ones that aren't are really high, so the more you use her, the better she'll get. But she starts off really lackluster. But she does have S rank in all magic weapons, or all magic... Yeah, all the magic tomes and staves. So, I guess if you wanted to use her, the best way to do that would be to use her as a staff bot, get her a few levels that way. Occasionally feed her a kill if you can, but don't go out of your way too much to do it. But eventually she'll be, relatively high-ish level for pre-promoted units, like 9, I guess. And she'll already have gained like 10 to 16 power, probably somewhere in the middle of that. Which I think she starts at 8 power, so that's nothing to sneeze at. But she's a very limited magic user until she levels up, at which point she's good at attacking. So kind of like any other staff user, honestly. I guess if you didn't want to use Samantha or Yo for staves for some reason, you could use Laguna and she'd get good eventually, but I think just deploying a unit that's already good at something is good enough. So I think I'm going to put Laguna here. I'm open to being wrong about this placement though, because it's one of the trickier ones. And I want to use her more in a second playthrough before I commit to this, but for now, I think she belongs here, and if I ever want to go back and edit this, I might. But for now, she's there. Okay, moving on. Let's talk about Nathan. Nathan's a sage, and his stats are really... His base stats are fine, except for defense. His growths are fine, again, except for defense. And honestly, it's really hard to find utility for Nathan. I used him a lot in my playthrough, thinking, oh, he's a sage already, he's pre-promoted. I don't really have a lot of good units, I'll just use him. But even then, he was mostly just a staff boss, and I kind of wish I used Laguna instead. He doesn't really stand out very much at all. But he's not like offensively bad either. I think he probably belongs like here or here even, just because extra magic user, basically. He's not like god awful like these two. But he's fine. Let's talk about Dietrich next. He's a ranger that you get in chapter 15, as long as he's alive. He's a green unit. So keeping him alive can be a bit of a tricky one, but if you do, you get a ranger with a brave bow. Now, the brave bow is just 2 range because it's not an iron bow, a steel bow, or a silver bow. But you can give him one of those things and he'll be able to attack at 3 range, which is very good in this hack. Other than that, though, his performance is not super standout. He's stands out more than like Nathan because being able to use bows is nice in this hack, but and being mounted is nice for rescuing. His con is relatively low, so that means his aid is really high. He can rescue most people. I'd probably just stick him here, honestly. Because by the time you get him, he definitely outclasses these guys. But then he doesn't really go anywhere else for the rest of the game. He's kind of just... He's appreciated, but he's not standout. These two you get in the same chapter. And they're both secret characters, sort of. Ira requires certain recruitment conditions in chapter 2, and then if you attack her in a certain way in chapter 2, you get her later in chapter 16, or at least you get the opportunity to get her. She's a hero, pretty much just like Taiga. Where she loses marks is her relatively low availability. She doesn't really stand out compared to Taiga. Like, by the time you get her, Taiga, his bases are probably going to be about, or rather his stats are probably going to be about the same as her bases, with maybe a couple points difference. The nice thing about her is that she does have a light brand, I think, to start with. I might be wrong about that, actually, now that I think about it. Doesn't really count towards her character, regardless. As a unit, I think she's a bit underwhelming. Considering all the other units that you have it by this point, but can still be more useful in Taiga in certain situations, like if Taiga had some good bad level ups or you haven't been attacking with him much. She could be a good replacement for him. I mean, losing him is a game over, so you can't really replace him per se, and he's often force deployed, but it doesn't stop you from deploying a second hero. So I'm going to actually put Ira, like, here, I think. No, here is best. Now, Alto. Remember how Myron didn't get any defense, or didn't get any resistance at all? He starts with 0, has 0 growths. Well, Alto has, I think, 6 defense and resistance. And also has 0% growths in those stats. And she's a warrior. So that makes using her kind of tricky. Now, as a character, all of her dialogue is about, I'm going to use this axe, blah, 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 axe, axe, axe. Test my axe against this strong foe. Don't listen to her. Just give her a bow. She can't take damage. I mean, she can. She has highish HP, but she also can't because she's going to die in 2 or 3 hits like everyone else on the board here, except for maybe Bird in certain situations. Alto's good at bow chip. I wouldn't rely on her for attacking with axes. And as a pre-promote, she's not bad. I would put her... like, the worst bow chipper is probably Bird. But that does assume that you promote as a Vanguard. Alto's already a warrior, so I think here's fine for her. Yeah. Alright, next is Shuko. He's a halberdier. You get him in chapter 17. All you have to do is pick him up as a green unit and drop him off in the escape zone, and he joins you at the end of the chapter. So theoretically, you only really have him for 18, 19, 20 in the finale. He's pretty good. He's a good halberdier. You don't have to train like Lawrence, but at the same time, he's a little bit on the slow side, speed-wise. So, I would just stick him like probably here-ish, like the end of B. Here is probably good. It's kind of more like the middle of B than the end, but whatever. He's a fine unit. Doesn't really stand out. He's just kind of there. Now these 5 are kind of the Gotos of the game. Although I would say there's not really one true Goto in this game. But they're all very useful endgame characters that you really only get at the end of the game. Hato is a Crusader. I think he starts at level 15. His bases are super high. His growths are fine too, I think. Being able to use staves really competently is not really new, and being able to use axes really competently is not really new for this crew, but what he brings to the table is just an extra solid unit that you could use in the endgame. I would put him probably here because he's just good right away. Although I would say that the others have more overall utility throughout the game. It's basically his availability holding him back. If he started in the prologue, he'd be up here, obviously. But he's a good unit to bring to the final chapter. Now these 4 all have special recruitment conditions, so I'll get into probably the least interesting one first. Victor is just the paladin, starts with a rapier, I think, and a short spear, if I remember correctly. Could be wrong on that. But pretty average stats for an endgame unit. Overall, not much special. The only... I will say, when I talk about Braenor, I'll talk about what makes Victor, like, maybe up here instead of, like... I'll get into it. You'll see what I mean. In fact, let me just skip ahead to Braenor. Braenor is a good unit. He has really high speed, so for a paladin at least, so one of the weapons he starts with, Megrez, is an S-rank sword, which is magic and also brave. So he can immediately attack at 1-2 range 4 times in a lot of cases. Now, of course, you can just give this weapon to someone else that S-rank swords, but he's arguably the best user of it. And what makes Braenor, Hartman, and Victor so good together is that they have the Knight's Triangle attack. Like the same thing that Wendy, Barth, and Boris have in FE6. They can do here. And that comes in really useful in the finale. Carmichael kind of has his interestingness stripped away because if you fulfill the recruitment conditions required to get him, you already have his S-rank axe by now, and someone is probably happily using it, probably like Horus or Taiga. And Carmichael doesn't stand out equipment-wise, but he is a Wyvern Lord, and that comes in handy in the finale where there's a lot of snipers. He's a flyer, of course, Wyvern Lord being a flying unit. And he's just a solid addition to the team when you need one, but he is an endgame unit. And then Borgen is Sage. The weapon that he comes with is an S-rank animatome that's effective against cavalry. So he can just kill horses, basically. But again, you can just trade that tome to someone else, and they'll be able to use it just as well. I'm almost kind of hesitant to tier the endgame units, because you don't even get them for that long, but I feel like Borgin is also high up, and doesn't require a lot of investment to get good. Obviously, very useful in the chapters that you get him, but ultimately held back by his availability, which is incredibly, incredibly low, for good reason. So this list turned out a lot more top-heavy than I thought it would. If I move anyone down, honestly, I might move Bird. No, Bird deserves to be up here. I think Goro doesn't, though. Sorry, Goro. I think you belong more closely to there. And, yeah, I think everyone is pretty good where they're at. So just to go over this list again, S-rank units are units that require pretty much no going out of your way to make them good. They're going to be good on their own right, either by being immediately useful, or you'll naturally want to use them through the course of your play, so they'll just get good anyway. Braynor is kind of an odd choice for this one, but the way I'm justifying this is he has enough speed to quadruple with the weapon that he starts with, and that's super useful in that particular chapter, just because of the enemy density. Now, A rank are units that do require a little bit of attention to unlock their full potential, but it's not much, and it can be easily spared. So all these units are, in one way or another, so good that you can't afford to not use them. Although these four are kind of odd because you get them at the end of the game, they do still require a little attention in terms of what equipment you give them and how well you use that equipment. B rank are units that don't stand out as being particularly good, but also don't stand out as being particularly bad. They all have their uses and may require promotion to unlock their full potential. So someone like Elise is a good example of a unit that requires a promotion, and so does Yo. And same with Ludo. Bird is just early game usefulness, basically. C tier are units that require some attention to get good, but can eventually get good over time, and only requires small sacrifices in your deployment choices to make them good. Like, all it requires to train up Filch is that you just don't deploy a bad combat unit that you're trying to make good, and just make her good instead. And then you get a 5-leaf shield out of it, maybe. Or Laguna, she's basically a staff bot until she gets a few levels. And then D tier are units that you probably don't want to bother using, although it could be fun to use them. Like, if I was going to do an Oops All X playthrough of this, like Oops All Amelia's, Oops All Rolf's, I would probably do Oops All Mert. Who knows? Maybe that is in the cards for one day, but that is a discussion for another time. So I'm going to call it good here. I'm going to save this list, but I might come back to it one day to change things around. But until then, thank you for watching and have a good one.